it's Crafty from Craftworks Distillery. I'm in my shed tonight. The still is bubbling away. I'm doing a wash run, and I've got a brew which is underway, which I'll finish up at the end of this. So welcome all to Australian Craft Distillers. Woo, don't bump that, whatever you do. Australian Craft Distillers shooting the shit live, unedited. Things happen. So what is, for those who haven't seen the first episode, this is the second episode. What is Australian Craft Distillers shooting the shit? It's basically an idea that the craft industry, there's a lot of people in the craft industry, a lot of personalities, a lot of personal stories. And I thought, wouldn't it be good for a distiller to ask another distiller a range of questions, coming at it from a distiller's standpoint, and hopefully give you some sort of insight into how we think and how we operate, and also how we communicate with each other and how collaborative we are and the sort of conversations we have with each other. So we thought it's a good insight. So last week, it was our good mate, Ed from OCD, or Auto Craft Distilling. And today, it's great. We've got Valero from Joadja Distillery, good mates of ours down at Mittagong, just out of Mittagong, in a place called Joadja. So without further ado, taking my Australian spirit, which is not my own, Val, what's in your glass, mate? What are you drinking?
Okay, well, I followed your lead. I was conflicted today because I had two that I really wanted to present, and I'm going to go for both. I'm going to start off probably with our friends out west. I don't know if you can see that. I'll just hold it a little bit closer.
The Blackgate.
Blackgate. This is the Apera. Now, of course, the Apera, which is the old sherry, the Australian sherry version, if you like. I had to pick this one, of course. Brian and Janice doing wonderful work out west. Fantastic spirit. May as well hold it up. That's it there. And
look at that colour.
Oh, the colour's incredible. I'm very, very jealous. But I think we can match that, you know, with our Spanish sherry barrels. But just a fantastic spirit. True craft. But you know, Brian is so passionate about how he does things. It ticks all the boxes. Interesting, though, because it's unpeated as far as I know, but I can pick something up there. Maybe because
right.
direct fired still, maybe you get little burnt notes and other little things, which is really quite extraordinary. So, but the thing is that's the charm about it, that it balances things really well. So This is my pick for the day. But don't forget, I've got another one I'll show you a little bit later. Very
right. Good. Excellent. All right. Well, I'm drinking Karoo Distillery, my good friends at Karoo, their Affinity Gin.
Nice.
Enjoying a little G&T tonight, and husband and wife team out at Kurrajong, Devil's Wilderness. Super passionate, super technical. They're my gin mentors. I've actually moved into gin, small scale. I'm not in the gin world. I'm on the side. I'm still a whiskey maker, but they're my gin mentors, and they say I'm their whiskey mentor. So it's a good relationship to have.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, all right, let's rip into it, eh?
Yeah.
So the approach with this is it's more conversational. It's we'll take questions from the audience if there's anyone out there that's got any questions, and like I said, it's unedited, it's free flow, it's Australian Craft Distillers shooting the shit. That's the name of the series. We're going to keep going 2020, 2021, and I've got enough people lined up to 2022, so we'll keep going. So my question to you, Valero, is paddock to bottle. So paddock to bottle is something very, very unusual on the world stage. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's only about 15, maybe 20 people in the world that are doing it. And I know you've done it now for how many seasons have you done it now?
Well, next month, next month in December, we'll be harvesting our fourth crop.
Fourth crop, right. So what I'd like to do is come at it from the angle of why did you start doing it? and how hard it was and the challenges you had right at the start to where you've got to where you're at right now, mate.
Okay. So what happened was when I was beginning the journey here, maybe 8 years ago or so, I was doing tours at Joadja. As you know, it's a ghost town, a heritage site. And we were doing tours of the site. And one day, a fellow by the name of Peter Hope came along. He was doing a tour. And it turned out that the bus driver that was bringing these people along said, if you have a look at the guy there with the hat, his name's Peter Hope. And he's running a distillery, or he's operating a distillery, paddock to bottle in Tasmania, just west of Hobart. Ended up being Redlands. Not Redland. Was it Redlands?
Yeah,
sorry, Redlands.
Yeah.
The original Redlands, yeah.
Original Redlands.
Yeah.
Before others took over and all the rest of it. Anyway,
Dean Jackson.
Yeah, and anyway, so I asked this fella. I said, I heard you're doing this distilling, the paddock to bottle. And I said, one day I'd like to grow some barley here. And he looked at the paddock and he shook his head and he said, you'll never grow barley here. And I said, okay, well, I won't, no problem. Kept going with it. And next thing, maybe a year or two later, I'm doing another tour and this fella taps me on the shoulder and he said, why don't you grow barley on the paddock? And I said, look, I've been told by an expert that you can't grow barley here. And he said, well, mate, I've been growing barley in New Zealand for 30 years. And I said, no, but this is special. It's got to be malting barley. And he goes, that's exactly what I've been doing, malting barley in New Zealand for 30 years. And I said, well, what can you do? Well, what can you show me? And he said, well, I'll get you a crop. He said, it won't be high yielding, but it'll be unique. And that's it. That's when the light got popped in my head. And next thing I know, I'm going. Now, this is important. This is to answer your question now, Crafty. This is where you've got to make sure that you're sensible about separating a dream and reality. Mm-hmm. It's expensive. It's not high yielding. It really has to be about passion. It has to be also about understanding that the field that you're going to use, number one, can grow barley. Number two, think about where you are because, for example, you've been down here and we've got, 10 acres under barley. We're going to extend that to about 30. But you've got to think, how do you harvest? You're not going to get a contractor to come out and do 10 acres. Minimum.
Not on your road.
Yeah, the massive scale and not on our side. So you really have to understand the logistics of it, the planning of it, soil testing and other things. Then the other part, of course, is, again, if you're going to grow your own barley, and we talk about barley, we can talk about other grain, and we can talk about other starches and sugars in general. But if you're going to do it on a paddock that you have on your property, that's very special. That's very personal as well. And the other thing about it is that you really have to let nature dictate what happens. If you go fighting against nature, it loses the craft component because then you become a chemist or a physicist or whatever, a scientist. And while science is good, because I'm an engineer, I like science, but I don't like science when it controls me. I like to control the science. And believe me, you can't control weather. You can't control moisture content in the soil or the pH in the soil and other things. And so my takeaway, if you like, in answer is let nature do it. Low yield, unique flavor.
So, okay, so from year one,
yep,
and you harvested, you partnered with Voyager,
correct,
Voyager Craft Malts from the malting aspect. So what sort of discussions did you have with Stu? Because I use Voyager. I'm a huge fan of Voyager. What conversations did you have to start with Stu to go down the line of the malting it?
Well, look, first of all, Stu's the one, as you know, the guys out west at Whitten, near Griffith, they're fantastic. First of all, the main thing was, let's see what it does. So, of course, they do some preliminary testing just to see what the composition is and so forth. Now, of course, let's be blunt. The barley you're going to grow on your own paddock may not meet certain criteria in terms of being plump, for example, high yielding with all the components that proper malting barley should be. So the good thing about the boys out west, Stu in particular, is that he explains this. He says, look, this is what you're going to get. You may have some issues with this or that or the other. I'll give you an example. In the second crop, we had high beta glucans coming through. It was blocking things up. You will have some struggles in terms of yield and other process hiccups that you're going to come across. And that's where Stu comes in. They can go along and explain to you very clearly, this is what's going to happen or not going to happen. And also he'll give you numbers. He'll say, look, you're going to get about 96% germinating rate or whatever. So the other good thing is a sense of humor about it, understanding that we're not trying to outdo anybody else. All we're trying to do is say, hey, we can do something here on our paddock and let again, your environment dictate where your flavor comes from. You can't get more craft than that. You know, we're not, and also it's single source. Don't forget that. And I don't know whether I showed you, but if you get, I'm not going to mention brand names, but you get some other grains, commercial grains, which are fantastic, nothing wrong with them. And you squeeze it in your hand and you bring it to your nose and you get a particular scent. And then you try your own that's been malted by the boys out west at Joadja, and you can tell there is a vast difference. And it might be the same variety. It could be Spartacus or Latrobe or whatever. Totally the same thing, but the aromas coming out are completely different. Whether they're better or worse, it's up to you. Everyone's got a different palate. But the beauty again is that it's unique. This you're going to taste Joadja. Just when you start with your process, you're going to taste Capity or whatever it is that wherever it is that your paddock is, and that's really special. The Scots have been doing it for a couple hundred years.
That's what I find quite exciting. I'll tell you a little backstory. So my empty barrels, well, my 60 square meter shed, I could not house empty barrels. Yeah. So I've got a farmer, he's now a friend, and my spent grain is taken away. I take it away, I drop it off. And we got talking about barley and we got talking about everything. And from there, pardon the pun, but an idea germinated that he grows barley. So I put two and two together and said, well, he said to me, would you be interested? You know, you use barley. I know you use barley. And I went down the line that you just went down. Well, yeah, it's malted barley. It has to be a certain grade, which led to a discussion with Stu. So I've introduced him to Stu from Joadja, and they're now talking. And the upshot of it is we are going to do a little trial. Nice. Expectations low, keeping them very, very low. I'm like you. Let's just see how this evolves. But to me, that's one of the things that's really exciting about the Australian craft spirits movement. And I do think it's a movement. I personally think we don't have a huge amount of constraints, you know, from a legislative standpoint, from an administration standpoint, things we can do. So now is our time. We're in a golden era where we can try different things, we can explore different things, and we're small enough, we're agile enough that we can respond to that. So what's your take on that? What do you think of the bigger picture and what's going on?
Well, look, the other day I went to we were invited to speak at a particular function here in the Southern Highlands. And there was a fellow, people may know who he is. His name's he's Peter Andrews, isn't it? Peter Andrews written a book about how to look after the land. And for example, in terms of, you know that we don't spray our crops. We don't use any chemicals at all. It's just whatever grows. So you get weeds coming through and all the rest of it. And his argument in a nutshell is, I'm answering your question, by the way. I'm just getting
that's cool. That's cool.
That the whole concept about looking after the land, that it's a really good opportunity. And I'm not going green or anything like that. Don't get me wrong. Nothing wrong with that. But I just want to say, if you can do things that are very special without mucking around with the science too much. And so there's a bit of a revolution for people, not only in the whiskey industry, but food in general, to try and do things in a way that you're going to get really good flavors. I always use the analogy, you imagine you go to your supermarket and you get this big tomato, it's massive, you can tell it's been grown hydroponically, and it's all about yield, no flavor. Well, then you get some tomatoes and you grow out the back with a bit of horse poo or whatever, and they're smaller tomatoes, but it's full of flavor. And you're doing no harm, there's no nasty chemicals in there. And that's what I'm saying, that the revolution, we are really, the whiskey and the distilling industry, if you like, in Australia is moving parallel to this ethos about doing things sustainably, doing things in a way that is all about flavour and about the craft and about the human spirit, not about the technology, if you like. And we're part of that movement.
Yeah, no, that's good. Now, 1 second, I just need to do something very importantly. Andrea, can I have another gin, please?
While you're topping up, topping up, we've had a question come through on Facebook. What was your biggest hurdle to getting started?
As in, paddock to bottle, or
I'd
in general?
say,
in general, probably.
In general, probably, yeah.
Okay, Valero, that's a really good question, and that's something I was going to ask. Is just to add some meat to that question. So, I think now to get into craft distilling, you've got to have at least $2.5 million, $3 million in your back pocket before you'd even consider it. I think I'm one of the last of the smell of the oily rag distilleries that put it together, from hoses that don't fit, secondhand pumps, milk vats converted into mash tuns and things like that. What's your take on where did you start, and what do you think on that question, Valero?
Well, certainly for me, we were very lucky because in terms of, that we acquired the property, and that building, the distillery building, was already there, approved by local and state government as a distillery, but it was empty, no water, no power, no equipment.
Thank you.
And so all that part was ticked off. It was now really questioning, because it's such a vast industry. There's not only whiskey, as you know, there's rum and brandy, gin and everything, and it's just gone through the roof. Yeah. And so then you start to question and saying, okay, what direction do you take? If you're passionate about one particular spirit, fair enough. But going back to what you just said, you're right. The growth, and I was one of the sort of early ones that saw from a couple of dozen distilleries to now hundreds of distilleries, and they're all getting better. They're smart, they're tech savvy, and they're going to be very competitive. And so in terms of starting out, like as you said, because you're probably, like you said, the last of the true smell of an oily rag type, but you do it so well, you're going to be successful, and you already are. But for anyone looking at getting into the industry, we've been lucky, true or not, we've been very lucky, because it's tougher and tougher and tougher. The only easy part is that if you believe in yourself, you get up in the morning and you say, I'm going to have a go, and you're going to have that attitude every day. Sometimes you get this little lurking thing on the side saying, what am I doing? And you go through self-doubt, but hopefully you've got the gumption somewhere deep inside that says, no, you've got to keep going. And the most important ingredient is this: get up in the morning and have a go, and don't stop that. And that's probably the single most important. You do need a lot of money nowadays, you're right. Again, there's a lot of very, very beautiful stuff, a lot of beautiful equipment coming out. If you're going to have a show pony, you're going to have a distillery where you're going to have tourists coming over and having a look. Boy, I mean, I'm just in awe in terms of what's out there. Some fantastic equipment coming from all parts of the world, the presentation, the whole thing. But by the same token, I'm not going to have any more fun than the day that I come and see you over there at the Capity and have a look at how it's really done. The real McCoy. I mean, you can't beat that. That's gold.
One of the things which I often think about is, there's a lot of ups. There's a lot of, as I say, natural highs in what we do. You sometimes you're bouncing around your shed. You got music going. You're really happy, and everything's going well. But then other times, everything is going wrong. And when one thing goes wrong, everything goes wrong.
Oh, yeah. So
when that happens, and particularly, you and I can relate to this personally. We both went through the fires. We were under direct threat, and that had absolutely had a psychological hit. It was hard to deal with that, but it had a financial hit as well. Oh, yeah. And so we came out of it. And personally, I thought I built in a lot of resilience from that. So when COVID struck, I felt quite resilient, but then I realized in a very short period of time, I wasn't resilient. This year's been a tough old year, toughest year ever. Yeah. From your standpoint, going back to the fires and how you handled the fires, then COVID, from a mental space standpoint, how did you and Elisa handle it, and how did you keep it together to where you are now, where things are now starting to move and things are a lot better than what they were?
Yeah, look, I'm going to be 55 in a couple of days, and I can tell you categorically that period for me was where I learned a lot and finally accepted that we're not as tough as we think we are, that mental health is very important, that acknowledging that there are things beyond our control. And in particular, it's not only the fear of the fire, it's the constant stress for extended periods of time.
Yeah.
It takes its toll. And so I learned that. And I don't know that I'd handled it that well. I think the fact that we're out here in the middle of nowhere sort of helps, because you do shut off at night, in the afternoon, and you don't hear traffic, you don't hear noise. And that was really helpful, very therapeutic. But then, as you said, COVID came, and I agree 100% that COVID, even though it's a horrific thing, I think we were better prepared. I think we came out of something that was going to, it was threatening directly, to now something that we can have some level of control, because we can protect ourselves. We can choose not to go into crowded areas. We can choose to, the hygiene, the distancing. So that was kind of easier, even though it's a more horrific thing in the overall world picture. It was kind of easier because we were in control. Whereas with the fires, you're not in control.
Yeah. Yes. No, the world's changed forever, I think, which leads me to my next question. And this is something which I'm sort of starting to come to a realization. I guess Australian craft distillers shooting the shit is a manifestation of my thinking. And what I'm thinking is Zoom, virtual, Facebook Live has developed a new platform that we can communicate with our audience. And it's not necessarily our traditional audience. We've got much further reach. I remember having this discussion with Scotty at the Oak Barrel. Yeah. The Oak Barrel is my spiritual home. It's where I'm launching first single malt on the 24th. And the Oak Barrel was a real community, and really enjoyed it. Really used to enjoy going in there and connecting with the people, and going to tasting sessions, with overseas distillers and local distillers, et cetera, et cetera. But what's happened with virtual is, and this is what Scotty said, is they're now talking to people in Melbourne. They're now talking to people all over Australia. Ivan Myers from World of Whiskey has said the same thing. He's international. So their reach has expanded. So our reach has expanded. And this is one of the reasons why I put Australian craft distillers shooting the shit together, because I saw it as a way we can connect further and tell real personal stories about each of the distilleries and what goes on behind. So from your standpoint, have you embraced Zoom, virtual, Facebook Live? Are you comfortable with the format? Do you see it as it's going to be around forever, or just a blip on the radar?
No, I think it's definitely it's definitely out there. It's working. I mentioned before I was looking at the ADSA awards, and it was all a virtual presentation, and it really is the way to go. I think initially some of us are going to struggle with it. I mean, look, I'm a bit of an old fart myself, but the point is, a lot of the younger generations, I've got my daughter Emily coming over next month to start taking over a lot of the stuff here, and she's very tech savvy, and so the younger generation will be able to click on really, really quickly. But again, we have to be nimble. We have to be able to adapt very quickly. And also the part that I still haven't quite worked out, maybe I'm not that clever, is one thing is to do when you've got a cellar door, people come over, they're doing a tasting, you're selling some product. When you're doing it virtually, of course, there's different ways of doing that. And you know better than I do how that can be done. But obviously, from a reality point of view, to get the sales happening, the important thing is to make sure that you convey what your story is and why your spirit is different. It doesn't have to be better or worse or anything. It's just, this is the story, and people have to be able to say, I can relate to that story, I can relate to that spirit, I want it, and they're going to buy it. So, because at the end of the day, we've got bills to pay, as you know. But yeah, no, it's definitely, the virtual world is here.
Well, you talk about stories, and you talk about, you don't necessarily have to be better. If we're all making the same product, it'd be boring. You'd be making it by numbers, whether it's whiskey, gin, vodka, liqueurs, whatever. But you've got a very unique story. And first time I tasted some of your products, I was straight away in my mind, I just had Glendronach. You are the Glendronach of Australia, you and Elisa, and what you do. So for those who don't know about Joadja, tell us your story.
Wow.
Your background.
So the background, in a nutshell, without boring too many people to tears, we've come about this in a very, very different way. I said before, we acquired the property to semi-retire. There's a building there that was built just a few years before and approved as a distillery. And the local authorities told us if we didn't run it as a distillery, they would revoke the consent because it's tied up with the Heritage Office and so on. And so we bought a still down from Tassie, went down to visit, of course, Bill Lark to find out how the industry worked. Initially looking at the idea of maybe renting the space out. But after talking to Bill for a bit, he was sort of saying, look, you can probably make your own whiskey if you want. You're halfway there if you can get these barrels in from your homeland, Spain. And I don't know whether of course you know, Elisa was born in Jerez, where sherry comes from. So we had a bit of a link there. And of course, the Scots have been coming over, and I always say pinching our barrels from southern Spain for a couple of 100 years. But I say that, of course, tongue in cheek. But the point is, that got the curiosity going. And then, of course, I then fell into, and this is what I want, this is, again, another takeaway, is I fell into this and fell in love with it. Because I'll give you an example, and this might be a little segue into my next whiskey, if you don't mind, which is, of course...
Go for it. Our friend.
Okay,
grumpy old man himself.
Yeah, grumpy old man, a Riverborn. Now, you might remember. Now, I've always said I wasn't really peated whiskies. You know, they're okay, but I wasn't really in love with them. But I think you were there, Crafty, when Marty was there as well, and you brought down a sample of one of these expressions, and I tasted it, and I think I remember saying, this is the best whiskey I've ever tasted. A peated whiskey, because, you know, my son loves peated whiskies. Elisa, she's dying for me to do a peated expression. But again, this is the takeaway is that for the punters out there, again, have a go. Have a taste, because you'll find something different. Just because it's a peated whiskey, for example, not all peated whiskies are the same. Just because it's and we do this even with gins, or even our famous little anise liqueur, which is a bit like Ouzo Sambuca, that licorice one that we do. People say, I don't like that particular, you know, I had a bad experience. And I say, look, just have a go. And then they taste it and you see them light up. And that's the point, that for us, just as it happened to me, that I fell into falling in love with spirits. And I traditionally wasn't someone that would be known to go out and have a drink. But now, of course, it's all about the flavor and about the character, the mouthfeel, the aromatics. It is, you fall in love. And that's what we want people to understand. It's not about the alcohol. It's not about the ABV. It's about so much more. And you've got to get out there and have a go and have fun.
So then on that, sorry to interrupt you, Crafty, there.
Local nerd, what's going on?
A question that's coming from Facebook for both of you, actually. Valero, what was it like releasing with your first release? How were the nerves, and Crafty as well, so close to your own first release? What are you feeling? What are you hoping for?
Valero, you go first, mate.
Well, I'll go first because you're about to, I'm sure that you're going through this, but you've got more confidence because you're a really great distiller. You know, for us, look, I'll be honest. So what happened, of course, we had some small 32-litre barrels, ex-Oloroso barrels. We had some PX, but they were a little bit bigger and they were going to take a little longer. But the little 32-litre barrels were ready to go. Now, remember, we only did 2 32-litre barrels in the first year. That was December 2014. And then we put 2 32-litre barrels December 2015. That's how much I was shitting my pants. Like, I just had no confidence at all. Anyway, so when I what happened, of course, every few months I'd take a little out and I'd have a little bit. And of course, I didn't know anyone in the industry at all. And I did have a couple of guys that knew a little bit out, and they were saying, "Oh, this is really good." And I'm thinking, "Oh, these guys are just pissing in my pocket." You know, I just had no confidence. Now the truth is, of course, being a small barrel, you've got, and in the Southern Highlands, similar to KBD where you are, you get this massive fluctuation in temperature. You get these low pressure systems coming through. You can almost hear the barrels hissing.
Absolutely.
It's magic. And of course, you get a little bit too much flavour up front. So I could concede that I was a bit worried that it was a little bit heavy on the oak and all the rest of it. But we had to have a go. You have to get out there and learn. And so, of course, when it came out, most of it was very positive. And one of the good things is that people are prepared to accept and say, well, this is the first release. there's potential there. There's good things coming. And a lot of people were saying, well, it is your first, but I can't wait to see your second, third, and fourth. You know, now you've got the benefit that you've got a lot more experience at this point, than I had back then, because back then I'd only been distilling for a year, well, for 2 years, and did very, very little. So yeah, absolutely nerve-wracking. But the advice that I'll give, and not to you, Crafty, because you know this, but anyone out there that wants to know, definitely get some people that are going to be impartial, that are going to know their stuff. Even judges and connoisseurs can have very different opinions on a particular dram. And I'll give you an example, if you don't mind, real quick. About a month ago, our ex-bourbon cask strength got a gold medal, and the other two, so in other words, release number 10 got a gold, but 11 and 12 got nothing. And now at the ADSA, the other two got gongs, and the one that got a gold got nothing. So the point is that it can, so don't be too concerned. Just make sure that you do get a broad range of people to help you out, to make sure that they give you a little bit of guidance in terms of where you're going, and do that early. Don't do it when it's 2 years or 2.5 years old. Do it as it's moving, because you have to learn how to manage your oak all the way through, not just at the end. It's not about the end game, it's how you manage that barrel all the way through.
Man, that so leads into my approach. So I assembled a group of people, which I actually call the Assembled. Hello, Assembled. I know some of you are watching tonight. And that was a group of people that I respect all of them in the group. Some are in the trade, some are not in the trade. Some are video reviewers, and it was an eclectic group of people, right? And I chose them all for various different reasons. And I asked them, each of them, I said, would you like to be part of the process of putting together the first Craftworks Distillery single malt release? So not independent bottling. This is it. This is where the ballies are out dangling, and let's just see.
Very vulnerable. I know what you mean.
See how we go. So they loved it. And so the first release that's coming out, which is currently under the name of Project Ian, for a very good reason, I gave them the components of Project Ian. So it's not a single cask, it's 3 casks, and it's a marriage of wet fill cask and heavily charred casks. And it's a very, very complex barrel program that's pulled it together. And then I also look at my new mate. I started 3 years ago, and I went straight into a new make spirit, which was based on a stout recipe, because I liked stout. And I look back now and I go, the ballies were really hanging out there. That was such a ballsy move, and it could have backfired massively. As it happens, I don't think it has. I think I've got a really good Craftworks DNA, which has got a really strong signature that's working well with the barrels. So I have a degree of confidence that when I release it, it's a good product. I know, because of the feedback that I've got from the Assembled and other people, and even just sell a door. So the other day I had someone come in to sell a door, and I said, would you like to try this? And this is cask strength. And she said, no, I don't like whiskey at all. And I said, can I ask you a favor? I said, can I give you a wee taste, and forget it's whiskey, right? Just taste it and tell me what you think of the taste. And by doing that, she tasted it and she gave me feedback, which was really exciting for me, because she had preconceived ideas about whiskey, and I'd basically parked those preconceived ideas, and she drank it and tasted it for what it was, and she liked it. So that's some more good feedback. So I look at it. Yes, there's nervousness for sure. Originally, I was going to release a couple of months ago, and I pulled back. And part of that purely was mental state. I was not in the right mental state to take it right to the line, because I was doubting myself too much. And then as things progressed and mental state improved, and then I I pulled in the assembled. And of course, I've got a great creative partner with the Todd. Hello, Todd.
Hey, Crafty.
My creative partner for the last 2 years. So bouncing ideas, and we've been working on this and other things. But anyway, that's enough about me, because I've rabbited on that question. But yeah, to answer the question in general, I think from what Valero said and from what I've said, it's challenging. It's very challenging. It's nerve-wracking. You got to find your own way, and yeah, hope other people like what you're doing.
Okay, so there's another question from Facebook.
Hang on 1 second. Andrea, I'll have one more gin and then I'll go on to the whiskey. Thank you. Carry on.
Okay, so there's another question from Facebook to the two of you.
Yep.
Do you feel that whiskey has the potential of becoming flooded like the gin market in Australia?
Valero, you want to go on that one?
Well, I've been talking to a lot of people about this, because it was, when you, first of all, it depends what you're reading, where you're getting your data from. I still think that there's a lot of scope. I don't think there are going to be a lot of whiskies coming out, but what happens is that a lot of our consumers are local. A lot of people, we've got a lot of a following, if you like. So as new ones come about in all parts of the country, they'll have their followers and they'll put demand on their product. Then you've got some of the big players, which I won't name, but we know who they are, and they're really doing wonderful things because they're telling the rest of the world that Australia has whiskey. So a lot of that product is actually going overseas. So from an Australian market perspective, I'm quietly confident that there's still going to be certainly more whiskey, but more demand as well. So I think it's going to just grow. I don't think we should be scared. I don't think there's going to be a glut. A lot of people talk about price and all the rest of it. And the scary part, I suppose, can be that some people that may have started their business on the model of looking at whiskey selling for $200 plus for half a litre should be a little bit careful, but I'm not expecting prices to drop. I'm expecting them to stay buoyant. There's also a level of respect for whiskey. Whiskey is a very different product. I'm not saying that it's better or worse. I'm just saying that people appreciate that a lot more work and risk goes into a bottle of whiskey than, say, gin. And I'm a gin maker as well. So I'm not putting down gin in any way. I'm just simply saying that it is a very, very specific product that has a long way to go. And I wouldn't be too afraid. Having said that, little caveat here, we don't know what's around the corner. But at the moment, I'm positive that the market is going to stay buoyant.
Yeah, I've got a similar take on it. I think what we're seeing is a stratification, and I'm talking specifically whiskey. Ooh, sorry, that was my little tripod. There's a stratification which is occurring. So you've got the larger Australian distillers that are gearing up and already supply a lot of product overseas, so export. And they're pricing accordingly based on their volumes and based on their aspirations, pardon me. Now, they are actually, I see that as a really positive thing for us, the smaller guys, because what happens is someone will come in and go, let's just make up a name. What am I looking at? Scales on a trolley. That's in the distillery. Scales on a trolley. Okay, so you've got a distillery called Scales on the Trolley. And so a new whiskey drinker who is drinking Scotch, for example, and he tries Scales on the Trolley for the first time, and he goes, well, this is a really good whiskey. This is sort of like a Scotch, but it's Australian, so I'm really enjoying it and I'm paying this price. But what happens if I pay this price? What else is out there? And I think that's what's happening, is the bigger guys can potentially grow the industry and pull people into the smaller end of town because people want that experience. And I think overlaying all that is things like what we're doing now. We are very, very accessible. We tell our stories, come down to our distilleries. We'll tell you what's going on. We'll show you what's going on. The sort of things that are not on a bottle, you've got to experience it firsthand. And you would say the same thing, Valero, when people come into your distillery, it's the whole experiential thing that people just put a smile on their face and they walk away with a bottle and they feel good about themselves. You've taken them to their happy place.
Very much so.
Yeah. And that's a big part of what we do. I also say, yes, there's a lot of new entries in the market, and some people I think are coming in for the wrong reason. I think some people are coming in for the right reason. This is my own personal opinion. But as I say to a good distiller mate of mine, it's a pool, and the pool is getting bigger, and we're all playing in our little parts of the pool. All right. So yes, it's getting more crowded, but the pool is getting bigger. So, and if you go back to what Bill Lark said, a rising tide floats all ships or all boats. We're better working together and trying to grow it, as opposed to going down the line of ripping each other down with prices and trying to undercut. That's not what this industry is about. I came from a competitive industry, and that is not why I'm doing what I do now.
So just on that, Crafty, leading into another question from Facebook, do you put much stock in the comments on Facebook and the rigorous conversation around price point and bottle size? When you
I go first? Okay. Can I go first on this one, Valero?
Sure.
So I've been wrestling with my first release, and I thought, well, I can go down the line. I actually did a Facebook post on this today. I said, I can go down the line of making something which is very accessible to the public, general public. So a mass flavor. I can go down the line of coming up with something very low strength ABV, watering it out, and just really basic to try and go for a real lowball price. And then I realized, well, that's not why I'm doing it's not why I make whiskey. It's the same reason. You don't make whiskey for the masses, right? That's not what we're about. So I don't feel threatened by pricing. People, if they appreciate the craft, they want to engage on a very personal level. And number one, we've got to make good product. I'll price it accordingly. My first release is cask strength, and it will be retail for $220. And I do not have any reservations in doing that. I don't think it's unreasonable. And I think if people appreciate the work that goes behind it, fair enough. What's your take, Valero?
100%. I remember we had conversations about this, about price.
We did.
A year or so ago, and I'm with you 100%. It's not a matter of just us trying to hold or push the price up. It's not that at all. You've got to do your numbers, and and don't forget small batches. It's you know that we're not going to get a return on investment for some time, so we can't just go along and just flood the market with product by lowering ABV or whatever. It really is craft, and that's really what your name's Crafty. It's about craft. It's about the artisan component. That it is personalities behind it. You could go along and get the Mona Lisa. I'm not comparing ourselves with that, but you can get some artwork and you can go along and make photocopies of it, and that's not what it is. It's about the brush strokes, and those brush strokes that we do when we're there sometimes at 2 o'clock in the morning waiting for a particular spirit run, and you're thinking about when you're going to cut, and that takes a lot of time. And people, and when they come to the distilleries, when they see it, they really walk away saying, I get it now. And they walk straight over to the counter and they get a couple of bottles of single malt whiskey at, $200 a bottle. So eventually, and when I say eventually, depending on what the market does, there may be a little bit of movement, but I'm still very confident that people appreciate that it is craft and that they do have to pay that little bit more. Remember also, and you know this as well, Crafty, our distillery, we have reasonably sized stills, but no PLCs, no computers, no data loggers, no actuating valves, no glycol systems. It's not a factory. It's not a factory. Every stage of the production has to be controlled by people, by our hands. our noses, you know, our palate, and it is craft. And with all due respect to the pub, hey, listen, I'll be the first to put my hand up. I've got absolutely no problems paying $200, $300 for a true craft bottle. No problem at all. And I reckon $220 for what you're going to be producing at cask strength. It's very, very, you've hit the mark. I wouldn't go any lower than that.
No.
And I think you've hit I think that price point, which is very important, mate, you're a master. You've hit the nail on the head. Beautiful.
I think it's also, you have the confidence behind it. You've done your research. You know what you produce is good product, and you tell a good story. And people, the business we're in is, I was going to say humanizing the art of whiskey. That's my tagline. I can't use that one. Sorry, but it's the whole experiential thing.
Yeah.
People are craving anti-digital. People are craving experiential. And so anything we can do to help them on that journey with experiential is so valued by people. And I find it all the time in my cellar door. People just light up. And you're the same. You'd be exactly the same.
100%.
All right. Well, we might finish this love fest for now and change the subject.
Yeah.
So I want to go on to rum. I was talking to a local today, and he came up to me and said, "Mate, are you making rum?" And I went, "I had a crack at it earlier this year. It'll be a couple of years, but yeah, absolutely. I want to make some rum as I'm going down the track." And he goes, "Give it a go with Bonox. Make up a cup of Bonox and throw some rum in. You'll love it." And I went away and I thought about it and thought, that's very interesting. What's your take? You're a rum maker. So what's your take on Bonox and rum? And what's your rum journey? Why are you making rum?
Well, rum, we started rum. First of all, I didn't really think about doing rum at all, but, and I don't even remember how it came about. I guess just reading up on it saying, gee, it seems to be relatively simple. And then, of course, there's a lot of talk about what, obviously, sugars from sugar cane, but whether you use molasses and the different types, and whether you use sucrose or raw sugar and different things. And I thought, look, just on the face of it, because I didn't want to overthink it. It was just really an experiment. And I said, well, because I know I've got a lot of intensity and flavor from the barrels, because the barrels are just as important, if not more. I thought, I'm not going to do all molasses. I'm going to do half molasses. From New South Wales, Manildra.
Yep.
Not that I've got anything against Queenslanders, of course, but I wanted to keep everything in New South Wales, part of the New South Wales Distillers Collective, as you know. The point is, cutting to the chase, I said, let's go a little bit easy on the heavier flavors in molasses. 50% molasses, 50% just sucrose, just white sugar, just to keep it a bit cleaner. Dissolved it, fermented. I didn't do any dunder or anything like that. Didn't know anything about dunder. Still sort of trying to grapple with different expressions about how that works, but I didn't do that. Double distillation straight into a PX barrel, 64 litre as well, 4 of them. 2 years later, bottled. And like I said, we've just found out now that ADSA have given us a silver for that one, and you've tasted that's an OP rum.
Beautiful.
And I'm really proud of that, because I guess the only part that I can say that I take a little bit of credit was that I didn't go too heavy on flavour. I really wanted to cut back. And but that's all. I don't know very much about rum. I learnt more about rum from speaking and chatting to people like yourself and people like Gavin Gillen and other people, and even, of course, Rubo and Marty Pye, about how to work rum. So I'm trying to get stuck into making some more. And I wish I could tell you more, but all I did there, the only part that I can tell you is that I was very cognizant of the fact that if I really went for heavy flavour, I didn't want to overdo it with a very small 64 litre XPX barrel.
I can't remember. There was an ADA conference in Adelaide 2-3 years ago. Did you go to the Adelaide one?
Yeah, I was there. Yep.
Do you remember the Rum Geek? Remember that guy?
I think.
Rum Geek. So I'll tell you my story of the Rum Geek. So I wanted to make rum, and it was sort of down the track, maybe a 5-year plan, make the rum. And there was this guy called the Rum Geek. He came out of Europe. He had some bars, and he was a real rum knowledgeable person, connoisseur, and he did a masterclass.
Okay.
And I was there. I think Marty from Riverbourne was next to me. I can't remember whoever. Anyway, so we had all these different rums lined up, and he was standing at the front. So the room was packed out. He was in the front, and he'd poured a rum, and he was standing there on his own, and he was just swirling the rum in the front of the class, and he was just nosing it, closing his eyes, and going off in his mind, right? And you watched him, and you went, man, this guy is so passionate about rum. He's just sniffed a rum. It's just taken him off on a journey, and he's standing there, and he sort of just stopped and went, oh shit, I've got people in front of me. I better start talking. So he talked about rum, the journey of rum, and all around the world's in rum. And I took one thing from, well, I took a lot of things, but the one thing that stuck in my head and actually advanced my journey on rum. He said, you guys in Australia, he goes, you know, you can make rum. You can make really good rum. He said, just use those wine casks that you got out there and all those different casks. And he said, and just make dirty, dirty rum. The world wants dirty, dirty rum. Yeah. And he's right. Rum, there's a rum naissance. Scotty from the Oak Barrel talks about it a lot. The rum naissance. Rum is happening. Rum is happening as we speak. It's exciting. There's a lot of different people making rum. As you mentioned, Brian and Janice from Blackgate, they've been making rum for 11 years, I think. You've got Husk, you've got James down in Melbourne making rum, and others making rum, Riverbourne making rum as well. So what's your take on, you get people come into your distillery and you present, you know, you talk about rum and they go, mate, I've had a bad experience with rum. I don't want to know about it. And you give them a taste of your rum. When you had rum, what do you see when they taste your rum? What do you visually note?
Well, again, with the craft movement, people are realizing that it's just not. I'm not going to mention the big rum companies, but they're different. They say, "Well, I didn't know rum could taste like this." So when I had rum, I don't have any more. One of the things that I remember thinking, I've got to be careful not to be perceived to be sticking my fingers in too many pies. For me, it was letting people know that I'm a distiller first, but I'm not going off on all sorts of tangents. Keep it very conservative in terms of the aged spirits, which is your brandy, your whiskey and so forth, and rum. But to answer your question about the rum, the first thing, sometimes I get ahead of myself and warn them and say, don't forget this is matured in a PX barrel, because I didn't want them to get a shock. Whereas a lot of the rums, of course, ex-bourbons and other barrels. So in my particular case, the big eye-opener was that we can produce rum. And if you've got barrels that are a little bit quirky or different, that's the beauty of it. That rum, just the same as whiskey. Whiskey is so broad. I mean, I'm just in love with whiskey. But rum can also be very exciting. Generally a lower price point as well, which is good for some. And you're in complexity, still being able to really pull things apart and really get a wonderful experience without paying that little bit more for what other whiskies, which deserve a little bit more, because a lot more work obviously goes into whiskey than rum. But the good thing again is that sometimes you do get people, and you can see they look at the shelf and they say, wow, a couple $100 for a bottle of whiskey. And then got to be careful here, because then they look down to the next shelf and they say, oh, dark spirit, $69, bang, and you've just missed out for the whiskey. So,
cannibalize your own sales.
Be a little bit clever about how you do that. But yeah, rum's exciting, and I think that rum's going to be the way to go. Well, there's also a lot of talk about things like craft vodka, which vodka, of course, for me traditionally was always ethanol and water, low aromatics. No, it's no flavor, no anything. And I've been convinced recently by someone who I won't mention, and showed me that you can have a craft vodka. And so I'm tinkering with that a little, because, you know, I've got a column as well. And but I'm going off on a tangent, getting back to rum, because of some parts of the economy that are suffering. They're not going to be able to come along and say, yep, I'll get a couple of bottles of whiskey or rum. And they may other products that still have a very high craft component, but just don't have the high price tag.
Yeah. Well, that is interesting because I wanted to have a discussion with you about gin. So for many, many years, I said, I will never, ever, ever in my lifetime make gin. I have no desire to make gin. I don't like gin. And then over the years, I've been drinking gin, learning about gin, very much driven by my good friends, Nick and Ali, Distillery, and started to appreciate Australian contemporary gins. Aisling Distillery, down in Griffith, making some amazing gins. Your gin, I've tried your gin, amazing. I'll tell you a shot in the dark story in a second, little side story. But to me, and I joke about this with Nick and Ali from Carew, there's the whiskey world, and the whiskey world, you know the platform. It's solid. You know what's going on. Whereas the gin world is a really crazy, crazy world because there's so many entrants. You know, everyone who opens a distillery, a brand new distillery, well, not everyone, but a lot go boom, straight into gin and make gin. Some are doing it for cash flow because ultimately they want to make whiskey, but they can't afford to. But the gin world is like this, whereas the whiskey world just seems a lot more stable. What's your take on the gin world and the whiskey world?
Yeah, the gin world is, for me, a little more concerning, more daunting, even though it's not really what I wanted to do. We obviously, as you said before, at the beginning, whilst you're waiting for the whiskies to come along, you're going to have a little bit of a play with some gin. Gin can be very confusing. For starters, as you said before, the ingredients for whiskey are fairly simple, even though you can have flavors from left, right, and center. But when it comes to gin, any number of combinations and permutations, it goes on forever. And you start to say, well, even though it's a lot quicker and sort of easier to make gin, it's more difficult to get the balance right. It starts to get more tedious, if you like, for lack of a better expression, because I love playing around with it, but it's tedious because you're going to sit there and you're going to say, how am I going to get the base, which is, of course, let's say it's your London Dry, the juniper forward, and then you're going to start playing with all these different other flavors, aromatics, botanicals to come up. Now, you can read any number of books about how to do that. At the end of the day, and I'll tell you a little bit about the way that I went, which has been successful for us. At the end of the day, I wanted to do a gin that I could say, I like my gin. You know, I don't want to go along and produce a whiskey and say, gee, I don't really like my whiskey, but it sells well. You know, otherwise you're not being honest. So when I just tell you the way I did, I just got juniper base, and then I started playing with, because I was trying to scramble for botanicals. It was so difficult. This is going back 2 or 3 years ago. It was a bit more difficult. And I started playing around, and I ended up tasting one particular formula, which ended up being only my 4th iteration. And I said, I really like this. Now, of course, a lot of gins, particularly gold medal winners, if you have them neat, they're not going to be very pleasant. They're really designed to be had with a tonic, for example. But what I was realizing was that when you've got people coming over, the general public coming over to your distillery, and they're going to taste your gin, generally you're going to give it to them neat. And so, of course, you want them to have a pleasant experience. And when they taste it, they say, wow, this is a sipping gin. You could have this without anything at all. And, and that's where I had bing, and I said, right, and they buy a bottle straight away. Mind you, I'm not suggesting that we're deceiving anyone in any way, not at all, because a lot of people then do go away and say, actually, I don't like gin because I don't like the tonic they put with it. I actually like the gin. So they actually now buy my gin for the gin itself. And in fact, some of the comments we got back with some of the medals or some of the competitions we entered was precisely that it's a wonderful gin neat. So for me, because maybe I'm a little bit lazy, I said, you know what, it's a gin that is really very pleasant. Leave it, don't touch it. Now I'm going to go along and experiment with other expressions, but for now, my opinion is keep it simple at the beginning, and then you can then start to let it evolve as you start to find new botanicals that you can play with.
Yeah.
But my advice is keep it simple. A lot of guys come along, guys and girls go along and say, 12, 15, 20 botanicals. It gets too busy. I couldn't possibly, I just go crazy. I'd just be there half 2 hours trying to think of what happened in my mouth, in my palate, you know, saying, what the hell?
How it all interacts and whether it's maceration, whether it's in the pot with its vapor. Yeah, I'll tell you the story of Shot in the Dark. So actually, before I do that, Luke and Todd, how are we going for time? Are we still okay, or are we getting towards the end?
We've just hit an hour.
Okay, so we'll keep going. We're in flow now. We'll keep going. So
we do have a couple of questions to put to you too.
Okay, let me just do the Shot in the Dark thing, and then we'll take some questions. So Valero, so Marty, from a good friend from Riverbourne, rang me up, and he knew I was struggling to try and put a gin together, and so he said, "Come on down, come on, we're going to make some gin." So I was like, and I was in a bit of a hole, just mentally wasn't in the right place for it. I go, all right, I'll come down. So I came down, took the family down, and because we always love going down there, it's a beautiful place in the world, and seeing Marty and Eileen. And he goes, right, we're going to make some gin. I go, right, okay, how much are we going to make? And I'm thinking we're going to make like 2-4 liters on a lab still, at the back of the shed. He goes, nah, we're going to make 100 liters. And it's like, what? We're going to make 100 liters of gin? So I had a basic recipe, and we played around with it a little bit. We threw some ginger into it, and we distilled it. And at the end of it, we tasted it and went, yeah, it's tasty, but it's not really gin. It's tasty. And he goes, oh, I can turn it into a kumquat liqueur. That'll be fine. Don't worry about it. So it's all good. So anyway, about 2 months later, I'm drinking it and going, oh, this is actually quite interesting. It's evolving. And then he rings me up and he goes, I actually really like this now. And they've had people tasting it. So they released it. And it's called Riverbourne Shot in the Dark Gin. And it's called Shot in the Dark because A, it was a shot in the dark, absolutely. And B, I was not in a good space, and it was in a dark space, so it was a pick-me-up, which is, it's quite a beautiful story, and gin means something. So yeah, there's a little gin story.
Yeah. No, gin can be a lot of fun.
Oh, exactly. So what's that? Sorry, Val. Carry on.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, so what's the questions we've got, Todd? Hit us with some questions, mate.
Okay, so this is from Callie on Zoom.
Yep.
She's actually put 3 questions in.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, so how do you picture the distillery in 5 to 10 years? This is to both of you.
Valero, 5 years, mate. That's a long time. Well, 5 months is a long time.
5 months. Well, if I'm still alive in 5 years, well, certainly at the moment we're pretty excited because we've got Emily, my daughter, coming in to help do a lot of the administrative type stuff and to keep me on the straight and narrow in terms of the discipline of what distilling is all about. So that's a good question. I would like to be pretty much where we are, maybe have a little bit more efficiency in how we handle, like we've got a very small distillery, as you know, and it's getting a little bit cramped. So certainly from a physicality point of view, like you, I'd like a little bit more space so that I'm not double handling a lot of stuff. You know this better than anyone, probably handling things 10 times before you can get to where you want to get.
Yep.
Yeah,
at least.
I don't necessarily envisage getting bigger, but the only way we can be competitive is to have some things that will help with the economies of scale. So that's fair enough. But I don't want to sell my soul and get, automate anything, for example. I still want to mash in. At the moment, mashing in by hand. I may have to let that go because you've got to get protein rests. You've got to control temperature a bit better. And so there are little things that I want to do technically, but do I want to get bigger? It depends how much my daughter wants me to pay her.
I can relate because my daughter is 10 and a half.
Yeah.
She was chief designer when she was 8, and she designed the label Black Soul Beast.
Nice.
She's now back on the payroll, but she doesn't get paid yet. And she's designed something which is very cool for next year as a release. So in 5 years, she'll be 16. So getting to the stage, hopefully, it's a family-owned business. it's a small business. I'm like you, Valero. I don't want to build an empire. I just want to build build a distillery which I have a comfortable living. I can do what I do. Definitely improve some efficiencies. Maybe save some money as well. It'd be nice to have a European holiday from time to time as well. Go back to Spain.
yeah, definitely. Yeah. No big aspirations. Certainly, we want to continue with, as you know, we want to go for that authenticity of the terroir, the provenance thing. That's really important for us. Also, little things like energy efficiency. We can get a little more hydro happening with the spring to get a bit of power generated from that. Just to make the whole story just build on this concept of authenticity in the craft and in the produce and what comes out of the paddocks. Maybe put down some and play around with some vodka, put down some vines, paddock to bottle, brandy. But
nice.
It's small quantities, but just to be able to show that it's not just about whiskey or gin, that we can do the traditional spirits like your aged spirits and a bit of gin and maybe even a little bit of craft vodka, but continue with the whole concept of craft.
Yeah, that's nice. So that was question 1. There was 3 questions. Was there, Todd, from memory?
That's right. Valero might have answered the second one.
Yeah.
But I'll ask it anyway. Do you have any projects in the pipeline that you'd like to share with us? That's to both of you as well.
Where do you start on that one? Val, do you want to go on that one?
I could tell you, but I'd have to kill you. You go ahead. Go ahead.
All right. I've got quite a few. So I have a very good brewer mate, a guy called Dave Henderson, Hop and Clover Brewing Company. Davey boy and I are doing barrel age projects. So he's taking whiskey barrels and making beer, and then I'm getting the beer cast back and then refilling, which I'm really excited about. I want to make a Craftworks beer. I want to take my mash bill and see what sort of beer it makes, because originally it was based on a stout, so that could be interesting. I have a relationship with a local winery in Mudgee, Peter Van Gent Winery, PVG, and we're doing some interesting projects. We'll continue to swap barrels. So basically, I take a vintage port barrel, I'll make a whiskey, and then that'll go back and they'll refill it, and we go back with some forwards, and we do different things. There's another winery called DeBow Repair. Will, a good friend of mine, local. We've talked about doing some projects and collaborations, and we're both massive fans on Armagnac. And DeBow Repair is situated at the same sort of altitude. It's got a climate very similar to Burgundy in France, and they make French style wines. So we've been talking, I don't think it's confidential. It's not now, that's for sure. We've been talking about how can we do an Armagnac type thing. So that's a project. And there's the challenge you've got is time and focus. That's the challenge I've got, and I'm sure you've got it too, Val. Is where do you put your energies? Because it's very easy to get distracted by bright shiny objects that take you off and go. You don't make money and you go nowhere. So you got to focus, don't you?
Yeah. Well, just one little quick thing. I'll give the viewers, the punters out there, a little bit of a scoop that you've got here.
Strictly confidential.
Confidential. So, of course, and most people are aware that a sherry is not just one wine. It's, of course, a range of wines that can range from the sweetest of them all at PX, which is your sweet sherry, and goes all the way to the other side with your Fino, which is completely different grape variety and very, very dry. So very happy to tell you that, of course, we've got in only about a month or maybe 6 weeks ago, a whole lot of barrels. Now, not only PX and Doloroso, but now we have what we call Amontillado.
Oh, nice.
So that's pretty rare. And so we're experimenting with that. And also, finally, barrel-aged gin. We've got just one little barrel just to play with for fun. And that comes from a northern region of Spain called La Rioja, which is a region in northern Spain. And that's a slightly different. But yeah, we're always playing with barrels. But look, you're not a distiller if you don't have imagination. If you're not dreaming, you're not a distiller. You're always dreaming about how you can really play around with flavors.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, I'll just add to that.
That actually ties us into the last question.
Okay, yep.
What is a crazy dream that you would like to achieve?
Okay. Well, not a crazy dream, but sort of along the lines of what I was just going to say. So a few years ago, I came up with the concept of the New South Wales Distillers Collective, which was basically a group of New South Wales distillers working together, helping each other, giving each other a leg up, and doing some collaborative projects. And so Valero, myself, Marty from Riverbourne, Brian from Blackgate, Ed from OCD was in it originally, Mobius are in it as well, and trying to think who else. But the idea is, and yeah, Valero, I was going to ring you and talk to you about this. So I've just done a project with Marty, and we've vatted some of his whiskey with some of my whiskey. And the three of us, we've talked before about doing a New South Wales. It's not blended because it's all single malt whiskey from distilleries. It's just the blending of three distilleries. But the idea of Joadja's richness, the PX, the Oloroso, the Glendronach style, with Marty's real fruity driven style and potentially peated, and mine, which is quite lush and chocolatey. The combination of the three and making just a really interesting release, New South Wales release. So that's a mad idea.
Yeah. You know, I mean, no problem.
I know you're in.
I always in. But I think now that you've asked the question about mad ideas, it's not really, well, I suppose it can be perceived to be mad, but you know that Joadja, it's a mining town, well, it's an abandoned mining town, and you know that we've got over 90 kilometres of tunnelling just in that little section of valley. And of course, what we want to do is get some barrels and mature them in the mines. It's a bit more stable. It's going to allow us to get more maturity a little bit. We need a little more time under barrel to let the spirit settle. And so for me, the dream here is to be able to do that. Of course, a bit of a dilemma because it's not a bonded area. So I've got to make sure that either I pay for the excise up front and then remove it from the bond store and hide it into one of the mines, or get permission to do it. But I don't think that's going to happen in a hurry. It's a little bit difficult because, of course, the ATO may be a bit concerned about security and other things. But I'll just have to cop the angel share. So whatever the angel share is, I would have paid for it up front. But imagine whiskey matured in mines that were mined by the Scots in Australia 130 years ago. Wow. Talk about a real homage, if you like, or a legacy, if you like. Well, legacy maybe not the right word, but basically just in honour of the, not hundreds, but thousands of Scottish people who came to Joadja to mine the kerosene shale in the hills. Many of them never left. They worked, played, lived there and never left and perished there. And so just in honour of the Scottish concept, that would be my dream, to be able to mature whiskey in the mines, mined by the Scottish people in Australia 130 years ago.
No, that's very, very cool. For those in Sydney who have not been to Joadja, whiskey lovers, so how far are you? You're about an hour and 3/4 out of Sydney?
Yeah, about an hour and 40 minutes down south, yeah.
Yeah, it is a very, very interesting distillery, I think, personally, and it is a personal opinion, but I think it's one of the most pretty, beautiful distilleries in Australia. It's very, very scenic. It's amazing landscape, and yeah, it's a place to visit. So, you know, an hour and 40 out of Sydney, it's well worth the drive. It really is, and there's a lot to do down there, and a lot of wineries in the area as well, of course. So, any other questions we got there, or we?
There's one more on Zoom from
yeah,
to both of you. What is your favourite Scotch expression and why?
Oh, that's easy. That's so easy. I'll go Val. So for me, there's one distillery, Scottish distillery, which I hold up above all other distilleries, and mainly because it was so inspirational for me in my journey. from very, very early piece. It's Bruichladdich. I'm a massive, massive fan of Bruichladdich. It started in the early 2000s. It started with the resurrection of Joadja Distillery with their first release called The Resurrection. But the things that they did, the expressions, the types, within a single distillery, you had everything you wanted, from a peated whiskey right through to an incredibly sherried whiskey. So Bruichladdich, massive fan to this day. And one of the great things that'll be a real pleasure for me when I release my first single malt whiskey is I'm cracking open a bottle of Bruichladdich Black Arts. I think it's a 1986, which is pretty damn special. So Bruichladdich, I love a lot of other Scottish distilleries, don't get me wrong, but Bruichladdich is just up there compared to others. Valero, what's yours? Oh, you there, Val?
Yeah, Val just needs to turn off his mic.
Oh, turn your mic off, mate.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, hear you now. Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, for me, again, probably because of the sherry influence, it's a real staple. Everyone knows it, but I just love it. I actually use this as a little, you know that I don't drink a lot, just a little tiny bit, and I really enjoy Aberlour, Abernar, cask strength. I just love it. And there's something about it that doesn't upset me at all, because sometimes you have a cask strength and it can give you just a little bit of heartburn. This one is just beautiful for me. It just, maybe again, because of that sherry influence, it just hits the spot for me every time. I can't floor it. And it's very well priced, and it's just one that I just love.
Yeah, no, yeah, I agree. Absolutely agree. Stunning.
Yeah.
Cool. Any more questions?
That's it from me.
Okay. How's our time?
9:17.
Another question. To caramel or not to caramel?
You saw my head shaking. No way. Never, ever, ever.
The question is why?
Yeah, no need.
No. The only reason caramel is used is to create uniformity of color, which in a bulk batch, you're basically just trying to get consistency in a look. But no, you'll find in fact, I don't know any Australian craft distillers who are making whiskey that are using caramel, but yeah, why would you? Let the barrel do its work.
Yep.
So any closing remarks from either of you?
Yeah, I would say, so this is episode 2 of Australian craft distillers shooting the shit. When I put this idea out, within 24 hours, I had 24 Australian craft distillers that were like, hell yeah, I want to be part of this. That's now jumped to about 40. And I've got more people that are saying, yeah, I want to be part of it. And I think they want to be part of it because what we're trying to do here is just have a conversation. And you know, there's no marketing, there's no BS. It's just we're having a conversation and saying what's going on in our little worlds, and each of our worlds is different. The point I'm trying to get across is that we are very interconnected. You know, I see it all the time. I see people come in and go, you know, I want to come into this industry, and they say, well, what advice would you give me? And I'm relatively new to it. I've only been in it 5.5 years. And I say, surround yourself with good people. You know, surround yourself with mentors, get to know people, and don't just be a taker. You know, you need to share your experiences. You need to connect with people. It's a family, it's an environment, it's a movement. So if you want to be part of it, yeah, be part of it and contribute. So hopefully Australian craft distillers shooting the shit is helping, and we'll see how we go with episode 3, 4, 5, 102. What about you, Valero? What's your finals?
Yeah, no, you're spot on. I think what you say is exactly it. Remember, I came from a slightly different background where I didn't wake up one day and say, I'm going to be a distiller. I fell into it and found, of course, coming from a very cutthroat type industry. I was in building and developing and other things, and it's very cutthroat, and everyone's got they'll hold their cards close to their chest. That doesn't apply here at all. Quite the contrary. You really open up, and you know that you're sharing information from the love of it, not because for no other reason. You are so passionate about your craft that you don't mind chatting, and you hit the nail on the head that it's not all about surrounding yourself with people and feeding off them. Quite the contrary. They're going to learn from you as well, because hey, the first lesson that you learn is from your mistakes, and we've all made mistakes, and I still make mistakes every day. That's part of the charm as well. Knowing that you say, wow, I've just learned something because I did something wrong, and you share that with people, and you have a laugh, you have a sense of humor about it. You can't beat the camaraderie that exists, particularly in distillers, craft distillers, and not taking anything away from the bigger guys, because they're inspirational as well in their own right. Like I said, they're dragging us up to the international market. But yeah, a lot of fun.
Yeah. Some good final words. So I think we'll call it there, guys, unless there's any more questions. But no more questions, we'll call it. All right. So that's episode 2, Australian Craft Distillers Shooting the Shit. Episode 3 in 2 weeks, and I'll put out details on who it is. The other thing too is we've now got a few internationals lined up that are dead keen to get involved with it, because they love what we're trying to do here. So we've got so far we've got Ned, head distiller from Waterford Distillery in Ireland. And Waterford is doing some really interesting things on the world stage. So to be able to shoot the shit with Ned is going to be pretty awesome. We've got Alan Bishop from Spirit of the Lick, French Lick, Indiana in the US. Very interesting character, all about the craft. It's going to be a really exciting conversation with him. Got Miles Monroe from Westwood. He's dead keen to have a chat, and we got a stout connection, so that's going to be a fun conversation. And we got Rachel McNeil from Isla. So Rachel is a mover and shaker in Isla. She knows everybody. She's coming from the educational standpoint and tourism standpoint. So we'll get a bit of an insight into Isla, and she's been telling me some interesting things about Isla and where Isla is right now, because it's so reliant on tourism, and of course there is no tourism, international tourism right now in the UK. So that's going to be an interesting discussion, and there's a few others as well lined up. So yeah, keep following. We're now on YouTube, so if you haven't watched it, you can pick it up on YouTube, and let's just keep shooting the shit and see where it goes. Crafty out.
See you guys.
Thanks.
See ya.